Happy New Year to all of you. Good morning to you as well. We are starting off 2025 with breaking news and a serious situation in New Orleans, where police are confirming at least 10 people have been killed after somebody appears to have driven into a crowd on Bourbon Street. Police are calling it a mass casualty event where people were celebrating the new year, as many did all across the country, including in Times Square. It's where we find our Emily Aketa, who's starting us off this morning. Emily, good morning.
Hey there, Hallie. We are following that rapidly developing situation. Just in the last few moments, we learned there is a mass casualty incident, a large police presence near Bourbon Street and Canal Street in New Orleans, Louisiana. The city posting to its website that 30 people have been injured and 10 people killed after a vehicle plowed into a large crowd overnight. Again, lots of police lights, a lot of response to that area. There was an alert sent out telling people to avoid the area. We are hoping to learn more details about this in the coming hours.
Welcome, everyone, to the Hurting Humanity channel. A new year starts with a new false flag. And it's not a surprise as we head into 2025 with Donald Trump taking office that we're going to see a lot of these events. It's not a surprise whoever is placed in office, to be quite honest. But the narrative surrounding this false flag is very important to pay attention to, as 10 people were killed on Bourbon Street in New Orleans after a suspect intentionally slammed his truck into a crowd. Now, if your brain is actually critically thinking, if you're actually processing what I'm saying and you're not in a sleep state, in a delta state, as most people's wavelengths are when they're listening to the news, you'll say that story sounds awfully familiar. And that's because this has been the theme over the last 5 to 10 years with a lot of these false flags. There have been cars and trucks used specifically targeting parades around the holidays. It's not a new narrative, and it's not because all of a sudden some strange people out there have a fetish over the holiday season to drive their cars into random people who are out celebrating Christmas or New Year's. It's because of multiple narratives that have to do with driverless vehicles in the future. Now, we'll start with the border narrative. And I want to remind people out there, just because an event is a false flag does not mean that there are not actual victims. So, of course, prayers go out to anyone if there are victims from this event. But what a false flag means is that the government stages this event. There are government operatives who go out and carry out these events to bring forth a new narrative or a narrative that has a bigger purpose. So in other words, the government uses people who are operatives to carry out the events on civilians. And then out of those events, the government comes in with new laws, or the government comes in with new narratives, all used for behavioral control and manipulation. Remember, the news is not here to inform you of events that happen. It is here to condition you. That's what it is. It's a conditioning mechanism. And that's why you hear the same repetitive stories most of the time. What happens in these events? There's never really a trial. 1 out of 10 people never live to talk about it, right? Because a dead man never lives to tell a lie, right? And this event, again, this person didn't end up having a trial. But here are the narratives coming out of this story as of me recording it. The suspect supposedly had explosive devices found inside of the vehicle. And of course, the narrative that continues to float, which is trending all over social media, is 1, terror attack, and 2, ISIS. Now, it's always a good time to remind people about the origins of ISIS. And before I do, I'll show you why the narrative of ISIS is trending. Because, of course, in any false flag, it's strategically staged, right? This guy from ISIS strategically put his flag on the back of the vehicle, and that's what all the media coverage out there is pointing to this flag as far as the conservative media goes. The conservative media is saying, why isn't the liberal media pointing out this flag on the back of his truck? And that's how this works. That's how government-created psychological operations work. They plant a flag on the back. The conservatives are in an uproar. Why are the conservatives in an uproar? They're in an uproar because ISIS is in America. And it's fitting heading into 2025 that ISIS is in America as Donald Trump comes in office, because this has to do with the border, right? All the stories over the last couple of years you've heard about the border and border security. You're going to need false flags like this to get digital IDs put into place. And remember, they choose events like parades. They choose places like malls, like schools, like grocery stores to draw you into the psyop so that you feel that this could potentially happen to you. This could happen to your children or your brother or sister or someone you know who's just looking to have a good time on New Year's Eve and go out down in New Orleans and celebrate and have a few cocktails and walk around, right? Or someone who was just innocently at the grocery store, or your kids who are innocently sent to school, which I should say, not so innocently sent to school, because there's nothing innocent about those institutions that parents are sending their kids to, which are nothing more than indoctrination camps. But the flag is what the focal point is on from the alt-right media. And ISIS is the word that's trending. For those of you that don't know, the origins of ISIS are directly from the United States government themselves. ISIS is a creation of the Central Intelligence Agency. It was created by our own government. Here's Barry Soetoro, Barack Obama, even talking about it, saying that we're speeding up the training of ISIL forces, ISIL, which is really ISIS. Listen.
So with the additional steps I ordered last month, we're speeding up training of ISIL forces, including volunteers from Sunni tribes in Anbar province. We're speeding up training of ISIL forces. We're speeding up training of ISIL forces.
So again, anytime you hear ISIS or any of these boogeymen groups attached to an event, understand that it's automatically a false flag, because these are all rogue groups that we're told these militant groups are working. They're radicals. They're extremists, right? They're funded by our own government. Look into Operation Timber Sycamore, okay, which was started in Libya. And this is when our government, the CIA, it was a CIA program, which weapons and funds were given to rebels like Al-Qaeda. And then, of course, they don't need to give weapons and things to Al-Qaeda because they just create these groups themselves. They train them here in America and they send them off to carry out these acts. They are government assets. They are government operatives. They're funded by our own government to bring about change to infrastructure, change the laws, change the rules. And in this case with the border, this is all about the digital ID. So the FBI released this statement. This morning, an individual drove a car into a crowd of people on Bourbon Street in New Orleans, killing a number of people and injuring dozens of others. The subject then engaged with local law enforcement and is now deceased. The FBI is the lead investigative agency, and we are working with our partners to investigate this as an act of terrorism. So almost immediately they tell you it's an act of terror. And listen to this clip I'm going to play for you from Fox News. Fox News, within hours of this happening, the morning of this story breaking, because it broke in the middle of the night, they already have information about the license plate of the truck and how convenient it was fed to Fox News so Fox News could parrot this out to the conservative audience and then get them all in an uproar and angry about border security, because the narrative is that this truck was spotted coming through a place called Eagle Pass. You might remember hearing about Eagle Pass over and over and over again the last year or two, because that's how this entire psychological operation works. Everybody knows of Eagle Pass now because of things like the standoff at Eagle Pass, right? Where the U.S. border enforcement had a showdown with people trying to cross the border. We even saw Texas fighting their own federal government over who should be allowed in, who shouldn't be allowed in. Should the borders be closed? Shouldn't they be closed? The standoff at Eagle Pass, we heard all about it, and how convenient that this car came right across at Eagle Pass.
Bring in David Spunt. He and R. Griff Jenkins are able to report that the suspect drove a truck with a Texas license plate that came through Eagle Pass, Texas 2 days ago. David, what else do you know about this vehicle?
So we're hearing that the vehicle was traced to coming across from Mexico into the United States at Eagle Pass, Texas 2 days ago. To be clear, we don't 100% know that this man, and we do know the suspect is a man, was the person driving that crossed the border. That is unclear at this point. We just know that the actual license plate was picked up by a reader at a border crossing. This is per two federal law enforcement sources to Fox News, that it was picked up crossing at that border station at Eagle Pass, Texas 2 days ago. I know that raises more questions than answers, but we are providing information to our viewers as we get it, the most accurate information. So that's what we know right now.
So again, it came across at Eagle Pass. Everybody who's watching at home doesn't realize they've already been programmed to know what Eagle Pass is. They don't even have to start explaining to you what Eagle Pass is, because you've already been conditioned and trained into knowing what Eagle Pass is. And 2 years ago, nobody would have known what Eagle Pass was, or at least 10 years ago, nobody would have known, because you never would have heard about it on the news. You only hear about it if they're conditioning you. So the second this story breaks, they come on the news, they go to their conservative audience, they're already suspicious about what is this, because they see a flag that they conveniently show you on the back of the truck. And then the Fox media, the conservative media, runs and starts talking about how this truck was spotted crossing Eagle Pass from Mexico into the U.S. So their brains automatically think about the border. They think about Eagle Pass. They think about the other things that are subtly programmed into them from Eagle Pass, like what the federal government has been allowing over the last 4 years by design, telling you these stories of people crossing illegally, because problem, reaction, solution. The solution is a digital ID that you will not be able to cross borders without one. It's the same thing they wanted during the outbreak. You kept hearing it. It was called a digital passport. They were trying to convince you to get, because they wanted to be able to track who had a cough and who had a sneeze and who was going where. Then we could, identify who carriers were. Well, they're using another PSYOP now to get you on board with that. And it's getting you so angry about all the crimes that are happening because the Democrat government's allowed all these illegals into the country, and they're going after young girls on college campuses. They're looting people's homes. The Democratic politicians aren't arresting them. They're re-releasing them, allowing them on the streets. This is all to condition you into wanting a digital ID. So the other narrative in there, I've talked about this since 2016. The other narrative that's in there is you'll see underneath some of the videos on this topic are people saying things like assault vehicles seem to be the new thing. And that's right. They don't even realize they've been getting conditioned into this as well. And as crazy as it sounds, it's about driverless vehicles. They've taken cars and turned them into weapons to actually convince people, and they're continuing to convince people that cars are a weapon and can be used as a weapon. But guess what? Can't be. Driverless vehicles. Of course, that's only from the civilian standpoint. For people like me and you, if they get us inside of a driverless vehicle, I'm sure conveniently it'll short circuit and drive off of a cliff. But for everybody else out there who lives in fear that they're going to go to a parade and get run over by someone, well, they're going to want driverless vehicles. Then, of course, you're going to hear more stories over the years about people drunk driving and texting and driving, which, again, is a horrible thing. We hear stories about people dying on their wedding days from drunk drivers. We hear stories about people texting and driving and families being killed. So these are horrible things, but there could be other ways to implement actual laws or principles to stop those things from happening, like texting and driving. For example, maybe getting into the car and the phone automatically deactivating from texting, right? Things like that. But it's about driverless vehicles. So you might remember a couple weeks ago, 5 killed, 200 injured in German Christmas market attack. Remember this man who lived to tell his tale, the man who killed 6 in a Christmas parade, got life, the big circus that this guy put on. He put on a complete charade. I'm sure some of you saw clips of it over the years, where he went into the courtroom and acted as his own lawyer. He's completely, utterly insane and narcissistic, done by design. He lived to tell his tale. So you could see an insane man standing in front of a courtroom and start asking yourself, I don't feel safe going outside because there's crazy people like this who are using cars as weapons. Remember the Charlottesville car attack, right? The Charlottesville car attack was a big thing a few years ago with the whole white supremacist narrative that surrounded that. And you could even see how subtly they're doing this, because you could even find a Wikipedia has vehicle ramming attacks as an actual, like if you were looking up terror attacks, vehicle ramming attack, a vehicle ramming attack, also known as vehicle as a weapon or VAW attacks, because they've normalized this quietly without people realizing they're actually naming this. There are more and more events that are happening where people are taking their cars and using them as weapons. And it's usually targeting a parade. That's usually an error because that's when a lot of people are standing outside, right? And then it's also the narrative. A lot of people go to parades and feel safe at parades. Well, now you can't feel safe at a parade. And what is the problem, reaction, solution? Well, of course, it's to remove drivers from their cars. Everybody in an EV car by 2035. And guess what? If you even ask the algorithm, ask the AIs out there, they tell you there's no exact date for when everyone will have a driverless vehicle. Some predictions say it could be as early as 2035. Others say it could be 2040. But it's in the works. And if you hear stories like this every single month for the next 10 years, you don't think people are going to be conditioned into wanting this? Well, of course they are, because that's how it works. So we have a false flag to lead into the year right off the bat, right? Immediately showing you a flag, telling you it's ISIS. People's brains go, what do you mean? How is ISIS in America? They're automatically conditioned already to say, oh my goodness, they're in America because the borders, because we haven't had the borders closed, because the Dems have left the borders open, right? So then they get even angrier and they say, this is ridiculous. Innocent people died. This guy has his ISIS flag on the back of the truck, but I'm not suspicious about the origins of ISIS and the CIA and the fact that the guy actually had the flag on the back of the truck, right? I'm not suspicious about that. He was just proud. He wanted to stick his flag out there and let you know beforehand. And immediately they start talking about what? They start talking about Eagle Pass and how, wait a minute, that truck came from Eagle Pass. We have word immediately. Within hours, they have word that they somehow tracked the license plate to Eagle Pass coming through, right? I mean, how long do we usually hear a not cold case, but any type of crime? It takes a little bit of time. Not within hours. They got the plate, they ran, oh, right. Because they could do things really quickly when they want to, right? Or they could just give you a written script and read it out to you really quickly when they want to, which is most of the time. So they conveniently find this thing coming across Eagle Pass, which you've already been conditioned into knowing about. Because really, when you think of Eagle Pass, it's the face of this entire border psyop over the last 4 years has been Eagle Pass. The pictures you've seen, the news clips which was manufactured that you've seen, all talking about Eagle Pass. So it works perfectly for the false flag, does it not? And then don't forget about all the stories that we've heard over the last 10 years, as crazy as it sounds, about vehicle attacks. How else do you think they're going to condition people into demanding driverless vehicles? The same way they've conditioned people into wanting other civilians to give up their guns, like Operation Orion was all about, right? Where they created these events around schools so that people out there would beg for other civilians to turn in their weapons and allow only the government to be the ones who hold weapons, right? Same thing here. You hear a story, you hear a story, you hear a story. You hear the people who resist to go to electric vehicles, driverless vehicles, and they'll continue to demand it. Now, it's going to take a long time for this to actually happen, but it's subtly there. There's a reason for it. The government could create a psyop any way they want to. The way and the means that they choose is very important, which is why all the school events have to happen with a bang bang. They don't happen with a knife. And if a real one happens with a knife in America, you won't hear about it. In Australia, you will, because they're passing knife ban laws over there. But we're not quite there yet. So in America, if you hear one about a knife, well, you won't hear one because they'll never put it on national news. It has to have a bang bang. It has to have a specific bang bang in the story, because that's how this whole thing works. And that's why you hear about these cars now, a vehicle ramming attack. And again, I'm not saying that there aren't victims or people affected by this. You only know as much as everybody else out there sees, but you have to understand when you hear false flag, don't automatically stand there and yell and say, how dare you? I know someone or this or that. Understand that it means that the people who are behind the event planned this out with the United States government. That's what a false flag is. And they plan these things out, not just because they're sadistic psychopaths. They plan it out because there's a narrative to the story. And the narrative of the story is always leading you to where they want to lead you. So in the case of the border, it's all been about getting a digital ID. In the case of the vehicles, it's about eventually getting everybody on board with driverless vehicles where they tell you that nobody's texting and driving, nobody's drinking and driving, everybody's safe. There's no traffic accidents anymore. Of course, that'll only be for regular civilians, not people like us, because if we ever get inside one, they'll drive us right off the road based on our opinions that they know that we have because they're listening to all of us and monitoring us. So the second one of us gets into one of these driverless vehicles, of course, we'll conveniently have some type of an accident. They'll say, oops, that was just a coinky dink there. That was 1 out of a million, right? This is how your government operates. Prayers for anybody who is affected, if indeed it is a real event. But make no mistake about it, the government always leaves their calling card. No one there to tell the tale. If there isn't a manifesto, which there won't be one if it's ISIS, because ISIS isn't going to really leave a manifesto, okay? All you need to do is put the ISIS flag. That is the manifesto. But just like Luigi with the United Healthcare manifesto, that's part of it. So they can get you inside the person's brain. They want you to relate to the story. They want you to feel the ins and outs. It's all psychological. I thank everybody for being there. I hope you're all doing well. God bless you and your families, as always.